I can't start this speech after having heard or listened to Slatsky's talk starting with this slide again, and just to remind you once again, so the consequence, what we describe as ventilator-induced lung injury, are the consequences of mechanical power brought to the lungs. And finally, this causes first an injury of the lungs themselves, and this injury creates a storm or an increase of mediators acting on remote organs. So that are finally the consequences of the mechanical power which is applied to the lungs during mechanical ventilation. So, and we know that these changes are quite different dependent from the degree of edema. Now we are talking about RDS patients. Depending from the degree of edema, so from the severity of the changes the lung underwent. So the more edema is in the lungs, the higher is the recruitability of the lungs, the higher is the dishomogeneity, and this means in fact that such type of lung is of course more likely to react to any kind of an increase of mechanical power than a healthy, non-injured lung. So, but at the same time, we should be aware that the lungs have a large potency to do remodeling and repair. And this is not only true for the alveolar space, but also for the capillary space and for the bronchial alveolar system in total. So I don't want to go into details about all the mechanisms and all the things behind that are able to do repair. But at the same time, we should know that if this system gets into imbalance, this is creating what we would call an injury to the extracellular matrix of the lung. So now let's approach, because my talk is practical aspects, which is quite difficult to do, but so we would probably define ventilator-induced lung injury as a consequence of periodically applied mechanical power for lungs and remote organs. I think from all the literature, from animal data as well as from data from clinical studies, there is a robust proof of concept that this is going to work. So an increase in mechanical power applied to the lungs leads to a type of injury that influences, in worst case, the outcome of the patient. However, what we do not know at all, the point or the threshold from which mechanical power overweighs the repair and remodeling capabilities of the lungs and destroy the immune balance. So we don't know from which point on there is an increase in inflammatory mediators. We don't know how long does it take, and we don't know how much power is necessary, dependent from the underlying severity of the lungs that are hit by the energy that is applied from breath to breath. So the clinical aim is choosing respiratory settings to achieve adequate oxygenation and decarboxylation. That's what we are aiming in, for the lowest price to pay with respect to the mechanical power that is transmitted to the lungs. That would be, academically spoken, the goal, the practical approach to make the risk for appearance of ventilator-induced lung injury as low as possible. And we have many times discussed during this session the driving pressure. So just to get you back to this is the cutoff point identified with this chart around 40 ml. And I, for many reasons, totally agree. This has been found in already injured lungs. So it's an open question where this point would be if you would look for the driving pressure, which might cause injury in patients with healthy lungs. So, but also here it has been shown, this is the data from the LungSafe study, that it's really separating between survivors or non-survivors. So the driving pressure has obviously clinical impact on outcome of patients. So, and just to make you aware, it's just one of the presentations with a constant positive end expiratory pressure, but an increase of driving pressure, and the relation clearly showing that there is an increase also of the mortality while increasing the driving pressure at the same level of PEEP. However, if you look carefully, this is also at a range where this occurs, which is above the level or the threshold we generally accept for mechanical ventilation. We would clearly say, well, stay with your peak pressure below 30 centimeters of water. So there are many doubts, or not many doubts, there is a reasonable doubt if you would have made the same observation, if you would have kept in mind, say, we wouldn't go with a plateau pressure above a level of 30 centimeters of water. So this is the story in total, and as you can see, there is the presentation right in the middle with an increasing PEEP, where you see there is no change, at least in the range presented here, there is no change with regard to mortality. So I would say, if the PEEP is increasing and the delta pressure remains the same, this doesn't change anything. I have my serious doubts about that. And this has to do with how is the power or the energy which is applied to the lung distributed. So let's say you use a situation where you have a seat level, and then you put during inspiration the volume in, so this describes the total inspiratory volume, and this is the energy which is supplied. When you increase PEEP, a larger part of this energy, which is dissipated in the lungs, becomes the part which is played or contributed by the positive and expiratory level. Let's keep that one. So just to make you aware where my concerns are, imagine the lung as a syringe. So this syringe is extended by the positive and expiratory pressure. You would suggest from physics, you would agree with me, it makes a difference if you apply a delta pressure of 15 at a quite extended spring, or if you do it at a spring which is quite close to its zero level. So this means the extension of the spring before you add your tidal volume or your delta pressure might play a role in applying whatever type of energy to the lungs. And this is just data from an animal experiment where we didn't change anything. We put the same mechanical power in the animals by keeping all the respiratory settings constant, but increasing the positive and expiratory PEEP level, as you can see, from 0 to 4 to 7 to 12 or 11.5 and to 18. And as you can see, the static type role is consistently increasing of the amount of the joules that you are applying to the lungs while increasing the static part of the pressure. So there is another issue. This is the famous cautious clay. Nobody of you in the room would like to take this hit, right? But now if you transfer this to mechanical ventilation, this is force times area times delta volume, because this is the delta volume is the energy which is in the hit, and you would agree that it makes a difference if you are hit once per minute or every 10 seconds. So frequency plays certainly, physically spoken, an important role. So this has also been proven by this study from Massimo Cressoni, where they also applied the same energy during mechanical ventilation, but simply increased the frequency. Ending finally up with a high frequency applied with this picture, so having a totally collapsed and condensed and consolidated lung. So I don't go to fight for this principle of calculating the mechanical power. It's just to make you aware that there are parts which are well described by the driving pressure, but there is also the part that is used as a static pressure to keep the lungs open, and to keep in mind that you continuously, periodically, breath by breath, put the energy of the driving pressure. So if you, just to go back once again to the conceptual idea of healthy or sick or injured lungs, if you go back to the original concept of meat, so to reach a situation where ventilation becomes in a quite short period of time injurious to the lungs, you have to choose a ratio between end expiratory lung volume, or FRC, and the applied tidal volume, which increases 2.5. So the strain has to be above 2.5. And this is what you normally reach if you use the total lung capacity times 2 for mechanical ventilation. So this leads to a deadly mechanical injury in each mammal as soon as you apply it in a period of, at the latest, 24 hours. So this is just the time course of such a type of mechanical ventilation in a formerly healthy lung. So what you could see over time, starting after 10 hours and going up to 25 hours, and after 25 hours you would say this is a full-blown ventilator-induced lung injury, and it obviously from the CT scan started for the first time after something like 10 to 12 hours. So I can skip this. Just to make you aware, this study has been carefully performed by doing CT scans in well-defined time frames. And as you can see here, the first CT scan was without densities, and roughly 3 hours later, the first density using double of the total lung capacity as tidal ventilation ended up in these changes. So now, if you think carefully, what would be ideal if we think about a practical application? What is the sense in defining thresholds for driving pressure, for mechanical power, from which on we believe that this leads with a high probability to a degree of injury that can't be controlled by the repair mechanisms of the lung? This would be a clear indication to use something that supports the gas exchange by extracorporeal support. So an idea could be tidal volume, driving pressure, and the power that is applied. And we apply this power for CO2 clearance, not for oxygenation, to move the lungs. That's why we apply this power. And if this would reach a definable critical threshold, this would be a clear indication with a good physiological rationale to apply extracorporeal gas exchange support. So the challenge will be for future research, finding and defining a threshold of mechanical power that would lead to relevant clinical effects. And this would be the indication for extracorporeal gas exchange. And I do now a very practical, very rough, very simplistic approach. I would just looking at the data, if you would have stayed below plateau pressure of 30, most of the patients that have been reported with the bad result from the high driving pressure would have just skipped out of the observation, because this would have never been reached. Keep the pressure in injured lungs. I don't know about the threshold because we have no evidence in non-injured lungs below 40 centimeters of water. And if there is potential for recruitment, it's up to you to define how you find out if the patient has potential for recruitment, yes or no, above 10. And my personal approach would be to calculate what we do in each patient continuously, just by recording from the ventilator the mechanical power, to get a full picture. and to keep in mind what is going to happen if you are modularizing not the delta pressure, but frequency or the peak that you are applying when you are getting, you are starting to play with the numbers to improve your gas exchange. And ideally, if we would be able to define a threshold for the power that can finally be reduced, not any longer reduced by changing ventilatory settings, this would be a serious practical consideration to look for the possibilities that are given by the use of extracorporeal gas exchange techniques. Thank you.